Hi there, U9. In this video, we're going to look at new materials. Now, I want to start by talking about this sprinter here, the sprinter called Jack Swift, an Australian Paralympic athlete. Now, you might notice in Jack's right leg there that he actually has a prosthetic limb or a prosthetic leg. Now, I want you to think just for a second about the complexity involved in designing something like that prosthetic leg that can allow an Olympic-level sprinter to still compete at a very high level. If you think of just our own legs and the intricacies of what makes our legs do what they do, the bones, the muscles, the tendons, all of that working together, being controlled by your nervous system to be able to propel your body forward either with running or walking or jumping. And here we have a design that tries to mimic that pattern of movement that the leg gets when we're running. And not only do you have to have something that's the right length and size to mimic the other leg, you need to have something that's got enough spring in it, in the foot part here, to allow that simulated run to occur. We need to have a part here that's strong enough to bear the weight that's going through it as the sprinter is running. So all these things have to be considered when we're designing this particular material to help Jack compete at the Paralympics. And it really highlights the need for why we need to continually improve and develop the materials that we have. So the question is, why develop new materials? Why do we do it at all? And the answer is really because we need them. We need new materials all the time. We need to improve what we have and keep evolving in how we use things and what we use them for. Now, the development of new materials can be restricted by the technology at the time. So an example of that can be seen with the axe, where here on the left-hand side we have a pretty primitive axe. It still does a reasonably good job of cutting things and chopping things, but you can see its the head part of the axe here is made of stone. It's basically just a bit of wood that's being used as the handle and some wrapping here to hold it all together. And if you compare that to, say, a more modern day axe, although the basic design is still similar, still the same, it's obviously been refined quite a lot. We now have a sharper blade. The head itself is much more refined and angular to get a better cut. Even the shape of the handle has changed to allow for a better weight distribution when we're using the axe as well. So all these small little micro changes have taken us from this really primitive but still very useful axe to what we have today. Again, this is the development of materials over time that leads to that. This axe was the best we could do at that time. This axe is the best we can do at this time. And in the future, we may have even a better axe that we can use. So let's look at some of the considerations when we consider making and creating new materials. And let's start by looking at social needs. Now, any sort of material generally is going to provide work and income for people, and that's really important if we're going to live in a society like we do. And certain materials can give an advantage to certain companies that allows them to be more dominant in their field than other companies. An example of that can be seen through plastic, where plastic is fairly ubiquitous in the world now, but there was a time when plastics were first being developed where they certainly gave companies an advantage in the way that they could be cost effectively used to produce new materials or new items that we could then sell or use to make other things. And so plastics have become a big part of our society. Now, it's not always great. There's a lot of plastic pollution. But again, with the advances in technology, we've been able to develop plastic that is now recyclable, and even plastic that is now biodegradable. And what's more than that is we're starting to genetically engineer bacteria that are able to use plastic as a source of food in breaking down the plastic to be used for its own materials to keep that bacteria alive. So again, all examples of technological advances that are leading to new materials. Other considerations are ethical needs. So the development of materials to make people's lives healthier or safer is generally considered a very good thing. And some of these new materials can really dramatically improve the quality of life for people needing them. One such material is this one here. Now, you may not immediately know what this is, but if I show you an X-ray like this, you should hopefully be able to piece it together. This here is part of a prosthetic limb or a prosthetic hip. And here we have, it's a different prosthetic used here, but it's a similar sort of replacement joint to what's being shown on the outside here. So this is a ball and socket or a ball joint for the hip. this part here would go into the upper part of the femur. This part here would sit into that socket part of the hip joint. And it would look something like this on an x-ray, where we have the socket part here, sorry, the ball part there, and then this part here that would go into the femur. Now, anyone who knows anyone who's had a hip replacement and has spoken to them about how they felt before the hip replacement would know that if you're in that arthritic state, it can be quite painful, quite incapacitating, can't move around very well, feel really awful and old and immobile a lot of the time. And within a relatively short period of time after getting a hip replacement, people can go back to doing lots of things they used to be able to do before. It might be something as simple as walking. It might be something like playing tennis. It might be something like getting back onto lifting weights or something like that as well. So again, these are materials that we're designing that are replacing parts of our body that are starting to wear down and greatly improving the quality of life for people that get them. A third area of consideration is environmental needs and things being developed because they're better for the environment. An example of that could be this car here. Now, some of you that know a little bit about cars might recognize this as being a Tesla. And the unique thing about Teslas is they are completely battery powered. So if you have a home, for example, that is able to generate electricity through solar panels, it's quite possible that once you buy your Tesla, that you don't need to use fossil fuels to run that car at all. You can generate the electricity from the sun, you can use that to energize your car, and the Teslas can get quite a lot of distance and usage out of their charges now, 500, 600 kilometers, fairly comparable to a tank of petrol. And these are the sort of things that are being developed and pushed forward because there's a recognition that we need to do something about the way we treat the environment and something to help the environment support us for a bit longer. Now, this is an example of a material that perhaps wasn't, in hindsight, a great thing to be playing with or using. Now, you might recognize it from these fibers here, or how it was used in building supplies here. And this is called asbestos. Now, asbestos was a fiber that was mined and used in a lot of building that went on in the middle of last century. Now, the trouble with asbestos is you can see when it breaks open here, we've got all these little stringy, fibery bits here, and they can be quite sharp. And if you inhale those, they can embed themselves in your lungs. And then over time, they cause a chronic irritation, which can eventually lead to a cancer, a form of cancer we call mesothelioma. Now, asbestos is pretty much not used in building at all anymore, despite at the time having a lot of great properties that made it valuable for building. And the reason is the risk and the cost of dealing with asbestos far outweighs any benefit we can have. But again, through advancing technology, we've been able to develop new materials that can replace what asbestos used to do and therefore create our houses to be safer overall and safe for those building those houses as well.